You know, there is a very specific kind of silence that can fall over a family dinner table.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It is not that comfortable silence either.
Right. It is not the silence of people who just do not have anything new to say. It is this heavy, honestly kind of unsettling silence of people who realize suddenly that they are no longer speaking the same language.
Yeah, it is that jarring realization where you look across the table at a child you raise and you just see a total disconnect.
Exactly. You realize their entire worldview, like the very foundation of how they perceive society, family, and right from wrong, has shifted completely beneath your feet.
It is an incredibly painful moment for any parent. Just staring at someone you have poured your whole life into and feeling like, I don't know, like you are looking at a stranger who actively disapproves of you.
And that feeling, that exact moment of intense generational whiplash, is the starting point for our deep dive today. We are looking at a single, highly provocative essay that has been circulating online and causing, well, massive debates.
It really has. It originated as a post by an author named Deepesh Divakara.
Right, and it poses a question that immediately just grabs you by the collar. He asks, has your child stopped admiring the civilization that raised them?
It is such a heavy question, and the author paints this vivid picture of modern youth who dream of leaving their home before they even truly understand it.
Yeah, he specifically references India in the text, right?
He does, but he is pointing to a much broader global phenomenon. He is talking about kids for whom family values suddenly sound oppressive, and cultural roots feel like, heavy chains rather than supportive anchors.
Now, before we really get into it, I need to be clear to you listening. This text is a total lightning rod. It dives into deeply charged cultural and political waters regarding the global education system.
Very charged.
So let's establish the ground rules right up front. We aren't endorsing these views, we are not taking sides, or declaring these claims as absolute truth.
Right. Our mission today is strictly to map the terrain of a very loud cultural argument. We want to impartially break down the author's metaphors and the underlying logic.
Exactly, just so you can understand what is being argued and why it is resonating with so many families right now. Because to really grasp this generational fracture the author is describing, we have to look at where he claims it originates.
And he argues it doesn't happen organically on the streets.
Yeah.
It is not just the result of kids hanging out with the wrong peer group.
Right. He claims it is meticulously engineered in the classroom. The essay opens with a striking concept. He writes, "The most successful revolutions do not arrive with tanks."
Such a powerful line. Instead, he says they arrive with textbooks. They arrive with teacher training workshops, smiling wellness experts, and, colorful certificates.
And the whole thing is justified by this impenetrable, bulletproof promise that it is all for the children.
Yeah, because when we normally think of a revolution, we think of loud, violent, sudden upheaval. But the author is suggesting that a much more permanent, deeply rooted revolution is actually quiet.
It is bureaucratic.
Exactly. It is structural. The core premise here is that there has been a fundamental shift in the very definition of what education actually means.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the essay argues that modern classrooms are no longer just teaching objective subjects, right?
Right. They aren't just teaching the mechanical formulas of mathematics or the cellular structure biology anymore. He says they are teaching identity.
But honestly, when I hear that schools are focusing on how kids feel, my first instinct isn't to sound the alarm. I mean, we want kids to be empathetic, right?
Sure, yeah. Most people would agree with that.
So if a school is teaching a child how to feel about a biology lesson, say, understanding the environmental impact of a local ecosystem, doesn't that just make them a well-rounded, compassionate citizen?
That is the standard defense, yes.
The author treats this like a sinister plot, but how do we actually differentiate between a school just trying to build holistic human beings and a school running an ideological boot camp?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the author's counter to that is that the line between holistic education and ideological training hasn't just been crossed, it has been entirely erased.
Erased. Wow.
Yeah, from the perspective of the essay, when you teach a child how to feel about society through a highly specific, curated lens, you aren't just teaching generic empathy. You are deliberately re-engineering their worldview.
Oh, I see. So you are providing them with a pre-packaged moral compass that directly competes with the moral compass provided by their parents or their heritage.
Exactly. So it is not empathy for empathy's sake. It is directed empathy. empathy for specific causes, and disdain for others.
Right. It is the difference between presenting a child with the history of their civilization and letting them form their own connection to it versus presenting that same history while simultaneously providing a rigid framework that instructs them to view it with suspicion.
The author argues that this mechanism is specifically designed to make inherited traditional values seem inherently oppressive.
Which begs a huge logistical question, If you are a parent listening to this right now, you might be thinking, if someone comes into my kid's school and tries to rewrite their moral code and tell them my values are oppressive, I am going to notice.
Right, the alarms would sound instantly.
So how on earth does an ideological shift this massive successfully infiltrate the education system without parents shutting it down immediately?
The essay points to two specific frameworks to explain how this happens right under parents' noses. The text targets CSE, which stands for Comprehensive Sexuality Education, and SEL, which is Social Emotional Learning.
I mean, these sound like corporate HR training modules. One deals with sexuality and gender, the other deals with emotions and interpersonal relationships.
Yes, and the author notes that both of these frameworks arrive wrapped in language that nobody in their right mind dares to question.
Right, the packaging is made of words like health, wellness, inclusion, and safety.
And that packaging functions as a shield. Imagine a parent looking at a syllabus. If they question a specific curriculum change, the immediate institutional counterargument is, well, why are you opposed to your child's wellness?
Oh, wow, yeah. Why are you against creating a safe, inclusive environment? It is a total linguistic trap that shuts down debate immediately.
Precisely. But the author insists we have to look past the beautiful packaging and examine the actual mechanics of the programs. Because the blueprints for these frameworks do not come from the local community.
Right, they aren't drafted by the local teachers, the school board, or the grandparents. The essay is very explicit about this. These blueprints originate thousands of miles away.
Yes, they are cooked up inside international institutions, global think tanks, well-funded NGO networks, and distant policy bodies.
And that geographic and cultural distance is central to the author's argument, right? Because when a global think tank defines safety, they aren't just talking about physical safety on the playground.
Exactly. They're often talking about ideological safety.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the author describes the method of entry, and it sounds exactly like a Trojan horse.
Oh, absolutely.
These massive international frameworks don't just knock on the front door of a local school and say, "Hi, we're here to replace your cultural heritage." If they did that, parents would riot.
They would. So instead, they sneak in through the side entrance.
Right. They come in disguised as supplementary health programs, after-school youth initiatives, anti-bullying awareness campaigns, and mandatory teacher training modules.
It is all about gradual normalization. The essay argues that this isn't an overnight curriculum overhaul. It is a slow, methodical introduction of new paradigms through these auxiliary programs. A workshop here, an awareness week there.
And the timeline the author lays out is chilling. Like a decade goes by, and these ideas are no longer just visiting guest speakers in the auditorium. They own a room inside the house.
They become deeply entrenched in the schools, the local universities, and especially the elite institutions.
These are the very places that parents are literally sacrificing their life savings to get their kids into.
We really need to pause and recognize why this creates such a massive blind spot for families. When educational policy, specifically policy regarding morality, identity, and emotions, is outsourced to international funding networks, local communities completely lose control.
They lose control over the cultural development of their own youth.
Right. A parent believes they're dropping their child off at a local school that generally reflects their local values. But the software running in that classroom has been programmed by a distant global think tank with a completely different, often competing set of priorities.
Oh, that is a perfect analogy. It is different software running on the local hardware. The school building looks the same, the uniforms are the same, but the operating system has been entirely swapped out.
Exactly.
So once that new software is installed and running, what exactly does it do? We have to look at the specific curriculum the author claims is actively competing with local heritage.
Well, the essay lists a very specific, sweeping set of paradigms that are being downloaded into these students.
Okay, like what?
The author claims children are being taught that identity is infinitely flexible, that gender is entirely fluid, that tradition is just a negotiable relic of the past.
Wow.
Yeah. That the nuclear family is an optional, perhaps outdated arrangement, that culture itself is merely a social construct, and that national citizenship is secondary to a broader global allegiance.
That is an overwhelming list to drop on a teenager. I mean, you can see how that completely dismantles the traditional foundation of almost any society.
It really does.
Yeah.
Everything that used to be a solid anchor, your family, your nation, your historical traditions, your biology, is suddenly presented as optional, fluid, or just a made-up construct that you need to deconstruct.
And the overarching message tying all of those fluid concepts together is the ideal of the global citizen, right?
Right. The students are taught that being global, which inherently implies being untethered, fluid, and highly critical of the local, is a more enlightened state of being than belonging to a specific place or faith or tradition.
The author uses this metaphor about a cultural buffet that only serves one dish. And reading that, it really clicked for me.
It is a great metaphor.
He calls out this movement on a massive paradox. He essentially asks how a movement that preaches diversity can be accused of making every country exactly the same. It is the illusion of diversity.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author calls this the masterpiece trick. The globalized education system preaches diversity of appearance, but it demands absolute conformity of thought.
Right. Think about the buffet metaphor. You might have a classroom with a student from India, one from Brazil, one from Japan, and one from Kenya.
Wow.
Visually, that looks like incredible diversity.
But if every single one of those students has been put through a curriculum that teaches them their local traditions are oppressive constructs, and they must all adopt the exact same global set of values regarding identity, family, and society,
then you don't actually have a diverse room. You have a room full of people who think exactly the same way, all completely disconnected from the diverse cultures that actually birthed them.
Exactly. Diversity of appearance, but a monolith of thought. But to achieve that level of conformity, the system have to successfully separate the child from their roots.
Because those kids aren't blank slates when they arrive, right? They have parents and grandparents who taught them differently.
That is the psychological leverage the author is exposing. How do you convince a child to willingly walk away from their heritage? You can't just tell them it's boring.
No, you have to convince them that rejecting their roots is the very definition of independence and moral clarity.
Right. You have to convince the student that the inherited wisdom of their grandparents isn't just old-fashioned, it is actively harmful.
You basically rebrand rebellion. You paint every previous generation as ignorant or backward. And when the child successfully cuts the cord to their own family and culture, the system hands them a certificate, pats them on the back, and calls it progress.
It is a highly effective psychological mechanism. If a student genuinely believes their ancestors were entirely wrong about everything, about family, society, morality, then the student feels a moral obligation to disconnect from them.
And then the institution positions itself as the enlightened savior, rescuing the student from the ignorance of their own family.
Exactly, which leads to a really dark place for the actual kids involved.
Yeah, we have seen the methods, the textbooks, the side entrance Trojan horses of SEL and CSE programs wrapped in wellness. We have looked at the teachings, the fluidity of identity, and the rejection of the local for the global.
But let's look at the human cost.
Right. So, what does this all mean? How does the author summarize this entire tragic cycle for the families involved? What is the psychological toll this takes on the individual student?
The outcome described in the source is deeply tragic. The author paints a portrait of a generation that is fundamentally untethered. Because when you strip away those anchors, you don't automatically create a liberated, free-thinking individual.
The essay points out that today's youth are more anxious, more isolated, and more medicated than ever before.
Yes. They have massive digital networks, like they're surrounded by thousands of people online, but they sit at that dinner table we talked about earlier, completely unable to speak to their own parents.
They know every single fleeting global trend on the internet. They understand complex international social theories, but they know almost nothing about their own rich heritage.
They don't know their grandparents' struggles. They are highly educated, yet strangely uprooted. They are hyper-connected, yet profoundly alone.
That is the ultimate paradox of this globalized education model, according to the text. In promising them the entire world, the system has stripped them of their home.
Exactly. They have a sophisticated global vocabulary, but absolutely no local language. And according to the author, when you remove the grounding structures of family, tradition, and cultural identity, you create an individual who is adrift.
They're anxious because they belong nowhere and to no one. They are just floating in a globalized ether.
This raises an important question about the life cycle here, because the author closes the essay by highlighting the dark irony of how this whole system is funded.
Oh man, this part is brutal. Think about what a modern family goes through. Parents will grind for 20 years. They will work tirelessly, skip vacations, sacrifice their own comfort, and drain their savings accounts, all to afford the exorbitant tuition required to get their child into the best elite institution possible.
They do it out of love. They genuinely believe that institution is the golden ticket to their child's success and happiness.
Right. And then what happens? The author argues that this exact same elite institution spends the next 4 years systematically convincing that child that everything their parents taught them, their religious values, their cultural traditions, their basic worldview, was fundamentally wrong and oppressive.
It is wild. The parents are literally paying a fortune to have their own children alienated from them.
And society, looking at this profound fracturing of the family unit, looking at parents who can no longer communicate with their kids, simply nods and calls the whole process education.
It perfectly encapsulates the author's critique. The system isn't broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. It is designed to replace the local inherited culture with a homogenized worldview, and it uses the parents' own aspirations and their own money to fund the extraction of their children.
That is such a devastating way to frame it. You spend 20 years building a foundation, you pay someone else an absolute fortune, and they use that money to dynamite the house, and then they hand your kid a diploma.
It forces us to look very closely at the unwritten curriculum in modern classrooms. The essay demands that we question the long-term societal cost of outsourcing moral and cultural development to international frameworks that have no stake in the local community.
This has been an incredibly heavy but fascinating journey today. To recap for you listening, we have been exploring a passionate, highly critical essay by Deepesh Divakaran.
Yes, arguing that modern education frameworks, specifically things like CSE and SEL, are acting as covert vehicles for globalized ideologies.
Ideologies that sneak in through the side door of wellness, actively strip children of their cultural roots, alienate them from their parents' values, and then successfully package that profound disconnection as progress.
We explored the illusion of the global cultural buffet, where everyone looks different but thinks exactly the same, and the ultimate tragic irony of parents funding their own obsolescence.
It is a powerful lens through which to view the growing generational divide. It challenges the assumption that all educational reform is inherently beneficial.
It really does.
And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on the tension we have explored today. If the very nature of higher education is, fundamentally, to expose a student to new ideas that challenge their preconceived notions, is it ever truly possible to have an education system that doesn't create some level of friction with the previous generation?
That is a great question.
Hasn't education always been a little bit disruptive to tradition? Or is the profound uprooting described in this essay a uniquely modern crisis? Is this generational whiplash something entirely new, accelerated by an internet age where global conformity isn't just taught but is just a click away?
Definitely something to think about.
Think back to that silent dinner table we started with. Is that silence the natural, inevitable cost of growing up and leaving the nest? Or is it the sound of a civilization quietly being erased? Keep questioning what you learn. Thank you to our expert for helping navigate these muddy waters today, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.